What are 3 things you must know to move from Helpdesk to Sysadmin? My name's Jake. I've been working in IT at an MSP for about a year now, and this is how I was able to break out of Tier 1 and move up to System Administrator. For those of you who don't know, an MSP is a managed service provider, so we give IT services to other companies. So the first thing you're going to have to learn in order to move up is how to read logs like a bloodhound. I don't care if it's event viewer, syslogs, show commands, gpresult, you have to be able to read logs like your life depends on it. Because it does. Logs are where the real answer lives. You can look for things like security event logs, 4625, failed logons. Don't just look at the username, look at these substatus codes and use GPT to make sense of them. This is going to give you a ton of information. Group policy, using things like gpresult/h is super clutch because you can push that HTML file out to a place on the computer and then analyze exactly what policies it's getting and what policies it's not getting. You might see access denied, missing scripts, a GPO not being applied because of some security group. You might use logs to look for DNS issues, bad forwarders, or stale A records. Oftentimes you're going to find these things faster in logs than just pinging around aimlessly. Now, why does this matter? Because at level 1, you reboot, and if it doesn't work, you escalate. You do some basic troubleshooting and you escalate. At the sysadmin level, you're responsible for finding the answer to the problem. Not only do you investigate, you bring receipts. You don't guess, you have to prove it. Now, one of my first wins at sysadmin level was when one of our company's core apps was not performing the way it was supposed to be performing. It was dropping connections and running slow, and I got into one of those very common situations where the vendor and seemingly everybody is blaming the network. I was able to use tools like continuous ping and WinMTR to prove that there was no packet loss or any real substantial latency. We pulled performance data, got on multiple vendor calls, rebuilt tunnels, and ultimately was able to work with them to show that it was a CPU bottleneck on their end. This is when people start trusting you with the bigger stuff, when you're able to find data and prove that it is or isn't what you think it is or isn't. The second thing I think you gotta know in order to go up to level 2 to a sysadmin is you have to understand DHCP and DNS. I know it sounds boring, but honestly, 90% of weird IT issues trace back to one of these 2 things. DNS, how your device actually resolves URLs. So when a user types in portal.office.com, the device doesn't just automatically know where to go. It's going to start by checking its local DNS cache. Then it's going to hit its configured DNS server, usually your domain controller. That's either going to help resolve the name internally or forward it externally to somewhere else. So you need to know the difference between things like forwarders and root hints. When your DNS server doesn't know the answer, where does it ask? You need to know the difference between internal and external zones. Is the name hosted inside your network or outside your network? And then aging and scavenging are going to be super important to things like cleaning up old stale DNS entries because these are going to cause conflicts and issues. And then DHCP is how IPs actually get handed out on a network. Most devices, most of the time, are not going to have a static IP set. They're going to have one automatically handed to them by this protocol. Your DHCP server is going to hand them out like a parking lot manager. But if 2 cars get in the same spot, that's an IP conflict. So you need to know how leases work and when they expire and how they expire, because they don't actually expire at the end of the lease. They expire first at the middle of their lease. How to make reservations like for critical devices like printers or servers. And then what causes conflicts like overlapping scopes or someone setting a static IP within a DHCP range. Super duper important, something that we do all the time. Let me give you a couple real world examples. We used to have clients with the DNS server set to the loopback address, which is 127.0.0.1, because the old Cisco umbrella roaming client used this to resolve DNS, or really to proxy DNS. This causes all kinds of issues because the umbrella roaming client is no longer a thing, and a lot of devices still have that loopback address set statically. So DNS just doesn't work, and people say, my internet doesn't work, and then you have to go in and fix it. I've also time and time again seen printers go offline because they have static IPs within the DHCP range. Random drops and things will print and then they won't print, and all these weird behaviors trace back to DHCP. And again, this stuff happens all the time. So why does this matter? If a user can't access his shared drive, or Outlook keeps going offline when they hop on the VPN or hop off the VPN, or a printer won't work sometimes, or it only works after a reboot, probably DNS or DHCP. So again, the help desk resets the NIC and hopes for the best. The sysadmin opens the DHCP console, checks the lease, reviews DNS records, and finds the source of the issue. That's the difference. And then finally, something you have to know to go up to sysadmin is scripting and automation. If you're doing something more than twice a day, script it, period. You can start with using PowerShell to create users, and then we can automate report generation, exporting things to CSV. We can use scheduled tasks to loop or batch process changes. And when you're doing all this, absolutely use GPT and VS Code as your personal helpers. We live in an amazing time where you don't have to read a book and actually learn PowerShell. You can ask ChatGPT and it will give you a phenomenal answer most of the time. So I wasn't some coding genius, but I learned early on that I have to use PowerShell to save myself time. And scripting will do this for you. It'll open up an absolute whole new world of productivity. For me, the first time that I really saw this was when I had to remove 20 contractors who were all fired at once from all of these distribution lists, all of these groups, all of these Entra groups. I could have spent hours clicking through AD and clicking through Entra, but instead I just wrote a few scripts using ChatGPT in probably 10 to 15 minutes and got it all done at once. I also use scripts all the time for log filtering now. Again, I used to go to Event Viewer and click and filter for the logs there. Now you can just write a PowerShell script and it'll find you the exact logs, when they happened, what you need, and you can move on with your life. And that kind of efficiency gets you noticed. You get stuff done. And a bonus thing you gotta learn is understand basic networking. You don't need to be a CCNA or CCNP networking beast, but if you can learn to trace and troubleshoot a basic networking issue to gather information before you send it off to the network engineers, it's gonna level you up. So you definitely gotta know ping, you gotta know traceroute, you gotta use ipconfig, and you gotta use these tools to actually reconcile against the documentation you have. So if you run a traceroute and the trace stops at some certain place, you need to find what is that IP? Is that one of our devices? Is that a different device? Like, where is this traffic stopping? That information alone is crucial. You got to understand what a default gateway is, and you got to understand what VLANs and subnets are and how these things work, especially if you're working in a place that's going to have segmented networks, which you probably should be. And then also just understanding when to hone in on the switch versus the endpoint versus the firewall. Always start with the endpoint or the switch. All right, so if you're serious about becoming a sysadmin, it starts with these 3-4 skills. Read logs, understand infrastructure basics, DHCP, DNS, and then automate the boring stuff. And learn a little bit of networking. If you nail those things, you're not just on your way to sysadmin work, you're already doing it. And if you want to actually build these skills, start labbing. Make a test tenant at home. Mess with DNS and use your buddy ChatGPT to write some baby PowerShell scripts. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. What matters is that you're not waiting for permission from someone to start leveling up. Like, this is stuff you can do on your own. And in IT in general, doing the work before someone actually gives it to you is the biggest factor for leveling up fast, speedrunning the tiers, and going from 0 to IT hero. If this helps you guys, drop a like and a sub if that's your thing. Really appreciate you guys. Have a good day. Be safe, be smart, make some good decisions, and start leveling up.